Sonic Universe Issue 89. I guess the reason Crystal Omega isn't attacking Knuckles and Amy while they're talking to each other is that he's being kept busy by Shadow and Rouge, and Shadow wants to hold back against him. Shadow throws another Chaos Spear to Omega to paralyze it, and Amy gets a call from Sally on the tablet. Rouge says it's amazing that she's getting any signal in an underground cave. Of course, because Shadow trails off, I know Omega is going to break free in the very next panel. It wore off really early, and if even Shadow's confused by this, I'd really like to know why that happened instead of just blaming the writer. So Shadow's hit, and Knuckles and Rouge protect Amy while she talks to Sally. So they start attacking Omega a lot, and what I saw them do against him wasn't really worth seeing Sally's message to Amy all over again. No impact with him or anything. Amy hits Shadow in Spin Dash form over to Omega. And for some reason, Amy needs to repeat Sally's message to Knuckles when he was in the same room as her when it was being played. I'd rather this happened right away, because I immediately stopped taking the fight scene seriously when he was paralyzed for like 2 seconds. Why is there a worthless padding villain scene where Ixis unrealistically talks to himself for 6 hours when he's supposed to be piecing the Master Emerald back together? He even does a bunch of recap. Why isn't he trying to pick up and fuse the pieces together individually with his hand and claw? So here's the fast but unnatural way that we find out how his reboot life is different. After the Genesis wave robbed him of his power, he was forced to turn to Eggman for help, and he stole Eggman's devices, and went to Wendy for help on how to use them. Then he supplanted the King, as he did before, apparently, and used his authority to find a means of restoring his power. And we see him mid-transformation into the King, as I can tell by the claw hand. Then Nicole was sent after him because Sally got suspicious, forcing his hand. Sally wouldn't have had the chance to get suspicious if he had, killed all of his enemies while shapeshifted to look like the King. Of course, that couldn't happen because it'd be too dark. But I need a better explanation than the meta one. And Ixis doesn't even remember why he left him with Metropolis, because confusing bullshit, instead of Sonic kicking him out. Ixis restores the Master Emerald eventually, and Knuckles psychically knows this, because he's the Guardian. Amy gives Knuckles a pep talk, and Shadow thinks that because Omega is growing resistant to the Chaos Spear out of bullshit, it means that the crystals are redirecting the energy into him. Because bullshit. Rouge asks Shadow why he doesn't use his Chaos Blast, as I wonder why redirecting the energy into him wouldn't just electrocute him to death. And he explains that he'd risk a cave-in, killing all of them, so it'd have to be a last resort to stop Ixis. He's in control of his Chaos Blast. Wouldn't he be in complete control of where the blast goes? And so it wouldn't hit stuff that would cause a cave-in? It would just hit what he wants it to hit. And for once, it's justified that Shadow didn't just immediately use Chaos Control to teleport away his enemy or teleport him apart, because he's his friend. Although it's still stupid that he doesn't use Chaos Control to freeze Omega in time repeatedly. He could paralyze him that way. It would be justified if we were told that he needs enough rings to do that every time, like in SC2's multiplayer. But the game's focus writer will never go quite far enough to do that when that would actually be good. This fight scene sucks. Knuckles manages to crack Omega's armor, and tells him to focus on that spot with enough force to break through. Somehow he thinks they're only going to get one shot at this. Omega's broken out of the crystals after a while, and says he's obligated to feel grateful, but wouldn't do the same for any of them. Rouge calls him Tin Man, and Shadow says he put them through a lot of trouble. But why did Omega say out loud Newbie's apology? He is sorry. Omega blasts the crystal barrier to get to Ixis, who's powered up with the Master Emerald, sending light around and freezing all of them in ice. Logically, kill them all immediately, but that makes logical sense. It'd also be bad writing because it'd be too dark, but then don't write a situation that should be impossible for the heroes to get out of. Maybe the heroes could have avoided this if Shadow used Chaos Control to teleport Ixis away or freeze him in time, instead of everyone standing there and talking like complete morons. They gave him all the time in the world. This predictable issue by Ian Flynn was about Crystal Omega being broken free of all those crystals controlling him after a lot of generic hits from the heroes, where the fight scene makes it impossible for me to take it seriously right away because he doesn't stay paralyzed for nearly as long this time, and the fight in general wasn't nearly interesting enough after that. So I'm not sure it was worth it lasting as long as it did after that. It's also about Ix's powering up with the Master Emerald he restored after finally explaining to us that he had shapeshifted into the King to get his authority before the reboot started. And Sally had gotten suspicious of the alleged King, unlike in Archie Sonic where she knew he was acting like a stranger, but didn't immediately figure out it was an imposter after all her experience, and her knowledge that the King was supposed to be incapacitated. For once a character was smarter in the reboot. It wasn't smart of the heroes to just stand there talking in front of Ixis instead of Shadow freezing him a time and teleporting him away. He could teleport him into the ground telefragged with it, unable to move anymore. He was willing to consider getting all of them killed to stop Ixis for even a second. Why wouldn't he kill Ixis outright? Not to mention Shadow had no excuse not to keep freezing Omega in time instead of risking the heroes' lives. He couldn't have repeatedly homing attacked Omega the whole time because Omega would have kept hitting him away from him. But if Omega was frozen in time, he could have done that no problem. That would have made for a boring fight scene. But then Shadow shouldn't have been in this plot because he's too overpowered, so he needs an intelligence downgrade to avoid breaking the stories. Eclipse hasn't even shown up yet, so were Shadow and Omega totally wrong about him being here and sent Ixis instead? If he does show up in the cave, he'll look like an idiot, because Eclipse should have taken advantage of all the time the heroes were distracted to run out of the cave with the Dark Arms and find a new hiding place. But he has to be here somewhere, or Shadow would have said he couldn't sense Eclipse anywhere. He's not even commenting on it.